Personal finance did not begin with budgeting apps or retirement accounts. It began with survival memory and the fragile promise that tomorrow might be safer if something was set aside today. When I trace the history of saving and spending, I do not see spreadsheets. I see granaries, dowries, hoarded coins, and quiet decisions made in kitchens after bad harvests or unexpected deaths. Personal finance, long before it was personal choice, was a response to uncertainty, and the way people managed money has always reflected what they feared most and what they hoped might endure beyond them. In ancient societies, saving was inseparable from survival. For most people, wealth was not abstract. It was tangible and perishable. Grain stored against famine, livestock kept for lean years, tools passed down generations. Money, where it existed, was less a planning instrument than a convenience for trade. In Mesopotamia and Egypt, elites accumulated silver and land, but ordinary households saved through relationships and reciprocity. Family temple and community were balance sheets. Spending was ritualized on weddings, funerals, offerings to gods because money was not only economic, but moral. To hoard excessively invited suspicion. To spend visibly affirmed one's place in the social order. The classical world refined money, but did not yet democratize finance. In Greece and Rome, coins circulated widely, yet saving remained precarious for most. Banks existed, but they served merchants and elites. For households, security came from land ownership and patronage. Roman fathers saved not for retirement, but for lineage dowries and political standing. Debt, however, was universal and dangerous. Without modern bankruptcy, overextension meant slavery or ruin. Here we see an early pattern that will repeat endlessly. Access to credit expands opportunity for some, while magnifying vulnerability for others. Spending could elevate status quickly. Saving preserved dignity slowly. The collapse of Roman order pushed personal finance back toward subsistence. In medieval Europe, money retreated, and saving became conservative, physical, and local. Serfs did not save in currency. They saved in obligations and favors. Security was embedded in custom. You survived because you belonged. Spending followed the agricultural calendar and religious life, not personal preference. Yet even here, money quietly returned through towns and trade. Merchants in Italian city-states began to keep accounts not merely to track profit, but to discipline behavior. Double-entry bookkeeping was not just a commercial tool, it was a moral technology. It taught people to see the future as something that could be planned, balanced, and corrected. The early modern period marked a profound psychological shift. As trade expanded and wages spread, individuals increasingly bore responsibility for their own futures. Saving became a virtue preached from pulpits and pamphlets alike. Protestant ethics celebrated thrift, not merely as prudence, but as moral worth. To save was to demonstrate self-control and divine favor. To spend frivolously hinted at moral failure. This cultural reframing mattered deeply. It normalized delayed gratification and tied personal finance to identity. At the same time, new financial instruments emerged: annuities, government bonds, life insurance that allowed individuals to translate savings into future security without land. For the first time, money itself could age on your behalf. Yet this new freedom carried risk. Early capitalism exposed households to market volatility they did not control. A merchant's savings could vanish with a shipwreck or war. A craftsman's income could disappear as tastes changed. Personal finance became a balancing act between opportunity and ruin. Spending promised advancement. Saving promised resilience. Those who misjudged timing paid dearly. History here is unsentimental. Prudence did not always protect, and risk-taking did not always punish. Outcomes depended as much on timing and structure as on character. Industrialization transformed personal finance more radically than any event before or since. Wages became regular, but also conditional. Time was monetized. For the first time, large numbers of people earned cash incomes disconnected from land. This enabled systematic saving, but also normalized dependency on continuous employment. Urban workers saved through cash mutual aid societies and early insurance schemes. Spending patterns shifted toward rent food, purchased rather than grown, and goods once considered luxuries. Consumption became visible and comparative. Saving was no longer just about survival, it was about respectability. The 19th century also introduced mass credit to ordinary people. Installment plans allowed families to buy furniture, clothing, and later appliances before they could afford them outright. This democratized comfort, but it also blurred the boundary between future income and present desire. Debt became normalized, even respectable, so long as it financed socially approved goods. Personal finance quietly absorbed a new logic. Borrowing was acceptable if it matched the narrative of progress. This tension between aspiration and restraint has never left us. The 20th century institutionalized personal finance. After the trauma of the Great Depression, saving acquired political significance. Governments encouraged thrift to stabilize banks and fund investment. Social security systems promised baseline security, reducing the need for extreme precautionary saving. At the same time, consumer credit expanded dramatically after World War II. Mortgages, car loans, and later credit cards transformed spending from episodic to continuous. Personal finance became structured around life stages: education, home ownership, retirement. The future was no longer imagined vaguely, it was scheduled. Yet this apparent stability masked a deeper shift. Risk was being redistributed. Where families once absorbed shocks internally, institutions now mediated them. This reduced fear, but also weakened financial memory. As inflation eroded cash savings and markets delivered rising returns, investing replaced saving as the dominant virtue. The patient saver was slowly displaced by the informed participant. Personal finance became more technical, more abstract, and more dependent on financial markets whose behavior individuals could not fully understand. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, personal finance entered an era of paradox. Never before had individuals had so many tools, so much information, and so many choices. And never before had outcomes felt so fragile. Wages stagnated for many, while costs of housing, education, and healthcare rose. Credit filled the gap. Spending became less about excess and more about maintenance of status and stability. Saving, once a moral habit, became a strategic challenge. The language shifted from thrift to optimization, from prudence to return. Looking across this long arc, one truth emerges with clarity. Personal finance is never merely personal. It reflects labor systems, cultural values, financial institutions, and political choices. How people save and spend tells us who bears risk and who is protected from it. When systems promise stability, individuals spend more freely. When systems fracture, individuals retreat into precaution. History does not judge these behaviors, it explains them. And it is here at the edge of our own moment that the story becomes unfinished, because the meaning of saving and spending is once again being rewritten by forces larger than any household technology, longevity, debt, and uncertainty. And the old assumptions about how individuals should prepare for the future are beginning to strain as personal finance moves away from predictable life paths and toward a world where security is fragmented, responsibility individualized, and the line between prudence and anxiety grows thinner with each passing generation. as the story of personal finance turns toward the pressures of a new age, where time horizons stretch longer, safety nets feel thinner, and money itself becomes less tangible. In the early 21st century, personal finance has entered a phase that feels familiar in structure, but unprecedented in scale. Individuals are once again being asked to shoulder risks that were previously absorbed by institutions, yet they are doing so in an environment far more complex than any before. Longevity has increased meaning. Savings must last decades longer. Careers have fragmented, making income less predictable. Housing, healthcare, and education have shifted from shared social goods toward individualized financial burdens. The result is not extravagance, but constant calculation. This shift has reshaped the psychology of saving and spending. Saving is no longer a simple act of restraint. It is an exercise in anxiety management. Households are told to plan for retirement emergencies, children's futures, and market downturns simultaneously, often with stagnant wages and volatile asset prices. Spending, meanwhile, is increasingly defensive. Credit is used not to indulge, but to smooth instability. What looks like excess from the outside often masks fragility beneath. History reminds us that this pattern is not moral failure. It is structural pressure expressed through individual behavior. Technology has intensified this transformation. Money moves invisibly, now reduced to numbers on screens. Frictionless payments encourage spending by dissolving the physical sensation of loss. At the same time, access to financial markets has been democratized. Individuals can invest, trade, and speculate with ease once reserved for professionals. This empowerment carries risk. When participation expands faster than understanding, volatility becomes personal. The line between saving and investing blurs, and households become exposed to market swings, once buffered by institutions. Once again, history repeats a familiar refrain: opportunity expands, and with it, vulnerability. What makes this era distinctive is the erosion of shared narratives. In earlier periods, personal finance followed relatively standardized paths, save for land, for dowry, for retirement for children. Today, paths diverge sharply. Some accumulate assets early through markets. Others fall behind despite discipline. Outcomes feel less tied to effort and more to timing, inheritance, and structural advantage. This undermines the moral framework that once supported thrift. When prudence does not reliably produce security, saving loses its cultural authority, and spending becomes a way to reclaim agency in an uncertain world. And yet beneath the noise, the ancient logic persists. People still save when they fear loss. They still spend when they feel secure. The difference is that signals of security are now volatile and contradictory. Asset markets rise while wages stagnate. Inflation erodes cash while debt expands. Institutions promise protection while quietly retreating from responsibility. Personal finance becomes less about optimization and more about navigation, less about maximizing returns and more about avoiding irreversible mistakes. History offers perspective here, not prescriptions. It tells us that no era has solved the tension between present needs and future security, only managed it differently. It shows that personal finance flourishes when risks are clearly understood and fairly shared, and breaks down when individuals are asked to absorb shocks that are systemic in nature. When saving becomes impossible for many, spending patterns shift, not because values decay, but because survival strategies adapt. As we look forward, the future of personal finance will depend less on new products and more on old questions. How much risk should individuals bear alone? What role should community and state play in smoothing life's uncertainties? How do we preserve the discipline of saving without demanding sacrifice in systems that do not reward it? These questions are not technical, they are historical and moral. They have been asked before in different forms, whenever economic structures changed faster than habits. If this journey through the history of saving and spending has changed how you see your own financial choices, I invite you to subscribe and continue exploring these financial stories with me, and to leave a comment sharing which era of personal finance you feel we most resemble today, because history does not tell us what to do with our money, but it does help us understand why we feel the way we do about it.